Good evening and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jake Miller and I'm an adult librarian here at the Kingston Frontenac Public Library. And I want to thank our organizers and partners that made this presentation possible. So the library actively promotes sustainable development through our collections and program offering and is happy to promote this session alongside Sustainable Kingston. I'll start with a land acknowledgement. The Kingston Frontenac Public Library recognizes that since the beginning of time, there have been hundreds of distinct sovereign nations of people with thriving communities, cultures, governance structures, and languages living on these lands. Guided by teachings from their ancestors, with leadership from Indigenous knowledge keepers, grandmothers, and elders, Indigenous people throughout Turtle Island, also known as North and South America, have been living in relationship with all things within the lands, waters, and sky, ensuring that there's enough for all, taking only what will be used, respecting Earth as the mother that sustains us all. Indigenous peoples have a responsibility to be protectors because of this relationship. They have become tellers of stories and the holders of teachings and ways of being, knowing and understanding the world. Indigenous languages were spoken, and stories were told in these trees long before words in English and French were heard. Those languages are still spoken today and are being reclaimed and revitalized by Indigenous peoples. The Kingston Frontenac Public Library acknowledges that our work takes place on the traditional territories of the Algonquin, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat, and is home to the Shaba-Abajuan First Nation, one of 10 communities that make up the Algonquins of Ontario. We acknowledge the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte and recognize that our region is home to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit from across Turtle Island, as well as Indigenous peoples from other areas of the world. Members of these Indigenous nations and communities share their knowledge, gifts, and stories with our library community. Our role as a library is strengthened by their contributions and the relationships we have with local Indigenous peoples, organizations, and governments. We recognize that these relationships are built on shared values: preserving and passing forward knowledge, exploring literacy in all its forms, environmental stewardship, and creating inclusive communities. The library must continue to demonstrate these values in how we engage, work, and share together. Without further ado, I'll introduce our moderator, Dan Hendry. Dan is a local sustainability champion and one of the volunteers that organized this event tonight. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks so much, Jake. And just to repeat a couple of things very quickly, thank you. I see that like hundreds of people have signed up for this. We see people in the chat. Thank you for attending tonight on this Wednesday night. Thank you for the KFLA Library, Sustainable Kingston, the other community volunteers that have put this together. When I see things like this, and this is an area I've been working in for a while, it's the people that give me hope. It's you. It's me, it's us together. And I can't wait to introduce Dr. Jonathan Foley from Project Drawdown, somebody I've looked up to for years, and it's nice to be on the same call with Jonathan today. I'd also like to give gratitude to the local and global Indigenous leadership who are on the forefront of conservation, stewardship, and climate action. For a few housekeeping items before we begin, as you might have seen, the session is being recorded, so we can share it with those that weren't able to make it and keep it as an evergreen resource for our community that will be hosted on the Sustainable Kingston YouTube channel. There will be a Q&A area down at the bottom that if you have questions throughout the presentation, you can be putting your questions in there, and at the end there will be time to ask questions to Dr. John Foley, and I'll be helping with that at the end of the talk. There's a live transcription or closed caption as well at the bottom. And so without further ado, as Jake said, I'd like to now introduce John Foley. Project Drawdown Executive Director, Dr. Jonathan Foley, is a world-renowned environmental scientist, sustainability expert, author, and public speaker. His work focuses on understanding our changing planet and finding new solutions to sustain the climate, ecosystems, and natural resources we all depend upon. John's groundbreaking research and insights have led him to be a trusted advisor to governments, foundations, non-governmental organizations, business leaders around the world. He and his colleagues had made major contributions to the understanding of the global ecosystems, food security, and the environment, climate change, and the sustainability of our world's resources. John, if you could join us now and take us away for the next 30 to 35 minutes, we all look forward to hearing what you're going to say today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you, everybody, for the wonderful and warm introduction and the opportunity to speak to all of you in Ontario. It's really a deep pleasure to be with you all today. So let me go ahead and share a little slide presentation I put together for you tonight, and I'll speak for about 35 minutes or so, I think, and then we'll transition to some questions and conversation later. So again, thank you, and thanks for the chance to be here today. Let me put up these slides, and we should be ready to go. Okay, well, I'm going to start off by just suggesting this. We're in a race between two very different but still possible futures. There's a future out there that may be the one you think is likely. I'm going to argue it's not, but that it's a future where we don't get it right. We just let climate change run amok, and we let it go into the darker places it could go, where climate change affects the most vulnerable people first, and then all of us eventually. And those impacts are growing and growing, and the future is getting bleaker and bleaker. That is one vision of the future, and it's one that a lot of people hold. But I'm going to argue there's an alternative vision of the future that we can also see happen. It's a future where we stop climate change and we start to build a better world for all. It's a world where new technologies, new movements, new policies, new community actions are growing and growing exponentially every day. I'm going to argue that we have a real chance to stop climate change. It is still a narrow window of opportunity in front of us, but that window is still open to build a more sustainable and more prosperous, secure, and equitable world than we've ever seen before. And I think we can win this race. But if we're going to win this race, we have to know why we aren't winning right now. First is we have to recognize we're being held back by a few things. One is we're held back by a lot of noise and confusion about what should we do. I think every sane person now knows climate change is real, but what do we do about it? How do we get to the solutions we need to have to stop this terrible problem? We also are being kind of held back by delay tactics and distractions. Some of that's on purpose. There are a lot of people who can't deny that climate change is real anymore, but they're pretty good at delaying things or causing distractions, getting us to fight amongst ourselves rather than moving forward with the solutions we need to have. And unfortunately, because of all this terrible news that we see every day, a lot of it being magnified by our press beyond what's actually true, we're seeing so much doubt and anxiety and fear and despair. Just at the moment we need people to lean in and engage in the climate problem, we see us crippled by doubt and anxiety and fear and disengage exactly at the moment we need people to engage the most. So to build a better future, we're going to have to change a few things. We're going to have to cut through the noise and all the confusion and follow the science. Science is what taught us about the climate change problem. It can also teach us about the solutions we can unfold and what we can do to make a better world. So I'll talk about that a little bit too. We also have to call out the delay and distraction techniques that people are trying to use to stop action or at least slow it down, and instead show bold leadership, move forward more quickly and more boldly than we've ever done before. And we're going to have to move past the kind of gloom and doom and the despair narratives that are dominating our media and our kind of public conversation and embrace a little bit of hope and possibility, because we can build a better world if we choose to do so. So let's get started. I'm going to give this talk in 3 little parts, maybe addressing each of these issues. Here's the first part. How do we cut through the noise and the confusion and follow the science about how to save the world? Well, to do this, I like to think about Matt Damon. Hollywood spent a lot of money saving Matt Damon from a lot of weird situations, but one of the movies I really loved him in was this movie called The Martian, where he plays an astronaut stranded on the surface of Mars, left behind, and he's got to figure out how to survive. Well, his character, a guy named Mark Watney, turns out to be a scientist, and he figures out how to survive on Mars all by himself. And he says this, he says, to survive, to solve this problem, you just begin. You do the math. You solve one problem, and then you solve the next one, and then the next. And this is the best quote in the whole movie. There's only one option. We're going to have to science the blank out of this. Well, that's true for climate change too. We're going to have to science the blank out of it, because that's what we're going to have to do And we listen to science already. We listened to it for 30 years now about the climate problem. We formed a thing called the IPCC. We listened to thousands of the best scientists in the world producing millions of pages of evidence and data sets and computer models and everything else about the problem of climate change. But when it comes to the solutions, we've kind of lost that science somehow. And now we're listening to just random people on Facebook, it seems, who just, oh, I've got the answer. It's this. No, it's that. It's the other thing. No, we have to look just as hard at the solutions to climate change as we did to the problem of climate change. Just like you would listen to the world-class doctors to diagnose your illness, you don't listen to some just randos on Facebook about how to cure your illness. You also listen to good, sound medical advice. So we need to do the same thing with climate change. And now let's see what science can help us do to actually solve the problem. The first thing it can do is help us identify what are viable solutions that actually work, not just harebrained money-making schemes or fads, but things that are actually out there. Well, Project Drawdown, the organization I work for, we've done a lot of the legwork for you already. We built a library of solutions, about 100 of them. We first published this in a book a few years back, but more recently we show in great technical detail how different solutions are viable today, whether they're in the electricity sector, things that could reduce the demand for electricity around efficiency or make electricity without burning carbon, or here solutions in food, agriculture, and land use, or solutions over in transportation, or the whole suite. We've got about 100 ready-to-go solutions where we have very carefully analyzed the technological and economic viability of these. These are ready to go. So that's one step. But then we've got to figure out how we deploy climate solutions, not just what the list of them are, but how do we do it? And I want to walk you through a few key principles that will help you think about this. Whether you're working at a community level, a national level, a global level, it doesn't matter. These basic ideas are really important. The first of which is climate change is really kind of a race against time. Time is the most important variable when it comes to climate change. Time is more important than tech, it's more important than money, it's more important than anything, but it's neglected most of the time. Why is time so important? Well, because we're in a race against it. Here's basically the game. We have two curves. The red curve is pollution. The green curve is removing carbon from the atmosphere, kind of cleaning up pollution. Right now, the red curve, greenhouse gas emissions, the pollution we're putting in the atmosphere causing climate change. Unfortunately, it's a big number and it's been going up, just the opposite of what we want. And if we look at the last 50 years and extrapolate it into the future, we might expect it to keep going up based on recent trends. Well, that's exactly the wrong thing to do. We don't want to increase pollution. We need to cut it and cut it dramatically. In fact, we need to cut it about in half within the next decade or so in order to stay on the path to stopping climate change within the so-called Paris Accords, limiting the effects of climate change to between 1.5 and 2 degrees. So we got to cut emissions and cut them fast and keep cutting them all the way into the middle of the century. So we cut and we cut and we cut and we cut all the way out to 2050 and beyond. But even with that, it's probably not going to happen where we eliminate every single source of greenhouse gas emissions in every country, in every sector, in every place in time. There's probably, despite our best efforts, even in the most optimistic scenarios, there's going to be some places that are still emitting a few greenhouse gases. So that's where carbon removal comes in. The idea that we could do things with nature, like plant more trees, farm regenerative and agricultural practices, and so on, and maybe even build machines that remove carbon out of the atmosphere and make up for that last remaining pollution. The problem is carbon removal right now is about zero. In fact, it's only about 1/1,000,000th of 1% of how much of the pollution we're putting in the atmosphere. So it's effectively not even measurable. We're going to have to increase carbon removal about 7 orders of magnitude, add 7 zeros to that number, in order for it to even remove the slightest bit of pollution we're still emitting by mid-century. So that's a big, big job. But here we are, if we can cut pollution dramatically fast and grow carbon removal over time, we can get to that blue curve, which is where we get to net zero by mid-century, and that's when we stop climate change from getting any worse. The sooner we can hit net zero, the sooner we're better off. But early action is crucial. Why? Well, it turns out that climate change is a cumulative problem. The pollution has been building up in the atmosphere for 150 years. Solutions need to accumulate too. For example, the cuts in emissions we take in the 2020s could prevent that much pollution from going in the atmosphere, the area between those two lines. That's the cumulative impact of emissions cuts in the 2020s. But investing in cutting emissions now in the 2020s will keep paying off in the 2030s and in the 2040s and accumulate to be a very large, powerful tool in stopping climate change, because climate solutions are cumulative over time. By the 2030s, we can cut emissions a little bit more, and that'll matter too. But by the 2040s, the impact of our solutions is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. This is why Bill Gates and technologists like him are often wrong about climate change. Waiting for high-tech solutions that only get to be turned on in the 2040s or 2050s means you've already run out of time. Where simple solutions like energy efficiency, renewables that are available now, stopping deforestation, things like that, can start now and accumulate impact for the next 30 years. So it's the area under the curve that matters, not the value on the curve. And that's something that a lot of tech people miss, and we've got to get this right. Carbon removal will be important too, but it's going to have a relatively small effect because it's starting from zero and growing slowly, but we'll need it by mid-century, but it's going to have a relatively small effect overall. It turns out emissions cuts are 96% of what we've got to do to stop climate change. And the emissions cuts of the first decade played out over the next 30 years are over 76% of what we need to do to stop climate change. Imagine that. Acting now is 3/4 of the answer. And then carbon removal, kind of what people seem to be obsessed with, is really only about 4% of the answer at best. So we have to remember that there is a time value of carbon. Climate solutions are cumulative, and time is more important than anything else. In fact, faraway solutions, those in the distant future, have to be discounted, just like you would apply a discount rate on financial investments. You do the same thing with carbon. So we can estimate the net present value of any climate solution. The longer you wait, the less effective it could ever be. So when you think about that in any sort of climate action plan, we need to recognize we need kind of different waves of climate action that are aligned with time. We desperately need what I call emergency brake climate solutions, things that can affect the atmosphere right now and help bend that curve quickly. Things like stopping deforestation immediately everywhere in the world as fast as we can. Plugging methane leaks, because methane warms the atmosphere much more than CO2, especially in the first 10 to 20 years. Also, big energy efficiency gains in the existing infrastructure. And we hit these emergency brakes while we're building out the new infrastructure, like renewable energy, more improved buildings, better transportation, electric vehicles, and so on and so on and so on. But that takes time. In North America, for example, the average gasoline-powered car lasts on the road about 18 years in the US and Canada. So even if we sold nothing but electric vehicles today, it would still take 10 to 20 years to flip over that car fleet. And we only have 30 years to get this right. So emergency brakes hitting now gives us time to turn over all the infrastructure of buildings, factories, power plants, transportation, and agriculture. So we need emergency brakes so that we have time to turn over the infrastructure. And also that we invest in people, Indigenous communities, women and girls, health and education, land tenure, things like this that are so critical, but that takes time. Investing in nature, like planting trees, regenerative agriculture, it takes decades for those carbon stocks to build up in soils and vegetation. So we need to allow for that time to build up carbon over time. Very important, but it doesn't happen overnight. And of course, new technologies, which might be the biggest, longest wild card of all, could be very important, but it'll have the smallest time window with which to operate. So again, emergency brakes, infrastructure, people, nature, and tech. We need to have different waves of solutions because they all operate differently over time, and time is the master variable. We also have to make sure that we align our resources, especially money, with carbon. It's kind of amazing that Governments and companies and philanthropists and investors are putting billions of dollars now into climate solutions, but none of them ever asked, where should I put it? Well, now Project Drawdown is giving them the answer, because we know where the carbon is. We have to avoid emitting about 1,500 gigatons of carbon between now and 2050. We know exactly where it is. We have to cut emissions in these 6 primary sectors: electricity, food, industry, transport, building operations, and other energy. We have to do it through massive efficiency gains and decarbonizing. We can double click on all of these and find out in great detail which sectors and subsectors are most affected. We also know that we can cut emissions indirectly by focusing on people first, especially indigenous communities, women and girls, and others, who can then lower emissions second by bending future emissions curves through changes in demography, economics, land tenure, and security. So these are things that are proven links. By helping people first, it reduces emissions later. And then, of course, carbon removal at the end, which will kind of mop up the last 4%, really important, but only a small part of the overall picture. And we can show investors and government officials and companies where we should be investing and which solutions are worth putting money into. For example, in electricity, we've already done the math to show which solutions are the most viable and ready to go now. Or in food, or in transport. We've got the plan and we've got the kind of backup data to show you what's going on. So this is the kind of Earth portfolio up above. This is what we need to do. Down below, though, is where the money's actually going. We've analyzed where dollars are going to help stop climate change, whether they're in philanthropy down below or venture capital. This one's really weird. Venture capitalists, technology investors, essentially spent about $90 billion last year on climate technology, but almost 2/3 of it just went into transportation. And worse than that, most of that was electric scooters and electric cars. At most, electric scooters and cars could displace about 5% of the world's emissions, but it got 66% of the world's money in technology development. That's insane. Why are they doing that? Well, it's an easy business model, and they all have Elon Musk envy, I guess. So this is a weirdly distorted allocation of money to the actual problem. We gotta fix this. And then we have government funding. This is the US Inflation Reduction Act, which will spend about $36 billion a year on climate solutions. We've analyzed this and found it's incredibly heavy-handed in electricity, which is great, hoping that will be a gateway to unlocking climate solutions in industry, transportation, and buildings later. But if we don't invest in that other stuff, it'll never happen. So this is kind of imbalanced, and is actually very poorly aligned in the agricultural space as investing in kind of the wrong technologies and not enough. So we have to kind of fix this as well. Governments, businesses, and even philanthropists, we need to do better and align our money with where the actual problem is. We also have to focus on geographic hotspots. In the original Drawdown book, we kind of gave just one number for the world for climate solutions, as if solar energy were the same in Iceland as it would be in California. But that's not really true. We know that if we go more granular and kind of go to the spatial analysis, we can find disproportionate opportunities to stop climate change. Here's a data set we've been putting together for every power plant in the world, showing how much CO2 they emit for the same amount of electricity. Well, this is huge. The red power plants are the ones you want to turn off first. The green ones are mainly hydro, nuclear, or maybe natural gas or renewables that are emitting a lot less carbon, especially the renewables and hydro and nukes. So how do we kind of disproportionately affect the high emitters while keeping the low emitters online as we move through replacing our energy infrastructure? Or protecting ecosystems. For example, here in the Amazon basin, this is an analysis we did using satellite data, mapping the carbon in the Amazon with lasers. How much should we be protecting this part of the forest versus that part from a carbon perspective? Obviously, we need to link that with indigenous communities' perspectives and a biodiversity perspective and others, but some forests are worth more than others to the climate system. So maybe they need a little extra protection, a little extra care to prevent deforestation. So we can target our interventions much more intelligently by using big data and these new kind of powerful satellite tools, which now we're beginning to deploy for climate solutions. We also need to make sure that climate solutions are aligned with what we call co-benefits, things that would help people and nature beyond climate change, because climate change isn't happening in a vacuum. Climate change is happening alongside so many other issues around the world, especially those around human well-being, equity, and justice. So we analyzed our library of climate solutions, all of these kind of circles here as a drawdown solution. We analyzed the ones in color to show how climate solutions on the left could unlock potential huge benefits to people on the right, especially in low and middle income countries. For people living under $2 a day, living in extreme poverty, climate solutions done right could unlock things like additional food security, more income and work, access to water and sanitation, improved health, gender equality, and so on and so on and so on. So putting it all together, we know that science can help us because it can identify the solutions we need, but also help us deploy those solutions in the most effective way. Because we can't waste 1 minute or $1 on the things that don't work. And now we've exhausted all of our time that we could waste, and we have to stick the landing every time we act from now until mid-century. And to do that, we need the best science possible. Okay, so that's how we can overcome some of the problems about climate solutions using more scientific guidance. And Drawdown's ready to help, and we're developing new programs, including a drawdown roadmap and a new geospatial tool that helps pinpoint climate solutions will be coming out later this year and next year. The second part I want to talk about is how we need to kind of call out the delay and distraction kind of artist out there and show more bold leadership. And gosh, we need bold leadership everywhere, in governments of all sizes, local, provincial, national, and beyond. We need it in communities. We need it in civil society. We need it in activism. We need it everywhere. But we also need it in the private sector. The private sector, business, which we sometimes don't think of as a friend of stopping climate change, really has an opportunity, and I would say an obligation, to do better. A lot of companies are saying they're climate leaders, but how do we know how they are doing? And how can we take them from this level of vague, hand-waving climate leadership, saying we'll be net zero, maybe someday in 2050, to real climate leadership? This is something we've been working on at Project Drawdown for the last 2 years. What we're showing on the right here is actually we got a bunch of companies together to put out a full-page ad in the New York Times asking our US Congress and the White House to act on climate solutions. And it included some huge companies like Salesforce and many, many others, and Google, and to really step up and address climate solutions. So we've been trying to figure out, how do we elevate climate leadership in the business world so it's not this vague hand-waving, potentially greenwashing, but how do we move forward in a more ambitious way? And we created something called a drawdown aligned business framework, where we said to businesses, there's more than one dimension of leadership here. Yes, you've got to reduce your emissions and be transparent in your climate disclosures. No more offsets, no more fig leaves pretending you cut emissions by paying somebody else for an offset. You've got to reduce emissions for real and disclose it. You've also got to have advocacy. You got to act with your voice and your policy power in our national capitals, in Ottawa, in Washington, and so on. And so we need businesses to come to our national leaders and advocate for climate change, not just the environmentalists. Government officials are much more likely to listen to the titans of industry than they are a bunch of greenies. So at least in the US, and I think in Canada too, getting business to join with the environmental movement and moving forward climate solutions is going to be very powerful if we can pull it off. We're going to change partnerships and procurement and business models, and also investment. A lot of companies are holding on to enormous sums of cash on their balance sheet, or even retirement funds of their employees. Where's that money going? Is it investing in oil and gas where it's doing harm to climate? Or is it investing in renewables and green solutions and so on? So we need to help with that too, as well as long-term thinking and transforming the business model. So we're trying to figure out, how do we get businesses to operate at a much higher level? And one key to that is helping to unlock the superpowers of companies by showing them that every job really is a climate job. Too often in businesses, the climate work is just happening in some small sustainability team down in the basement. Or maybe if you're lucky, it's in the C-suite and maybe in the leadership of the company in 1 or 2 positions. But instead, we're saying, no, it needs to be everyone. So my colleague Jamie Alexander coined the phrase, every job is a climate job, with a great TED Talk she gave. And we've actually created guides for companies to go across the entire company, including Google, Hewlett-Packard, and many others, showing tens of thousands of employees how their job can be a climate job and how they can contribute to changing the very nature of business to make it more aligned with what we need in leadership for climate change. So that's just one example of how we can take bold leadership. And one of the hardest places is the business world, but we need bold leadership everywhere, from communities to the UN and everything in between, and we need to do better. Finally, I just want to share the third part about how do we maybe move past this kind of paralyzing doom and despair that all of us seem to be feeling lately, and embrace a little bit more hope and possibility. I'm going to argue that we're doing a poor job of this right now, because the climate conversation kind of feels like this. What's very interesting is these data are for the United States, but I suspect they're very analogous in Canada. There's a very, very strange phenomena going on in North America and in Europe and other countries around the world too. But basically, we've broken through already and did it years ago. It turns out Americans anyway, about 92% of Americans already believe that climate change is real. I don't care about the remaining 8%. They don't want vaccines. They think the earth is flat. They're wearing tinfoil hats, whatever. I don't know. But 92% is a win, and I'm going to take it. We've convinced the world climate change is real. And we've already convinced many people that it's serious. 60% of Americans and more now are either alarmed or concerned about the issues of climate change. So they believe and they realize it's serious. But here's the disconnect. Only 2% of Americans say that climate change is a, quote, top issue facing them or the nation. What? What the hell? It's believed, it's known to be serious, but it's not a top issue. The things that are listed as top issues, ironically, are things about the economy, like jobs, inflation, or about health, or equity, community issues, equity and justice, health and security, education, and so on. But if you think about it, all of those issues are dependent on climate change. That if climate change goes to hell in a handbasket, all of those things are going to get worse. And on the flip side, climate solutions that can actually stop climate change makes all those things better. Climate solutions can help create jobs, reduce inflation, improve security, dramatically improve health, and improve equity and justice, the things we care about most. So climate change is underneath everything we care about, either as a bad thing if we get it wrong, or as a good thing when we get it right, but we don't see it. The other thing is we've been hitting the drums of climate doom and gloom so much in the media, in activism, in politics, that most people are now climate anxious and are disengaged. In North American media, in Canada and the US, 99% of the media coverage about climate change is about the negative news, the doom and the gloom and so on. Less than 1% of our media coverage today is showing climate solutions or climate actors that are doing good things. But that's not the real world. Yes, there are problems. There's 50% of the story is doom and gloom. I got you. We already heard that part. But I would argue, and it's true, honestly, half the story is there are solutions. There are things happening. There are amazing people and amazing solutions growing every day. Why aren't we talking at least a little bit about that? How about 5%, 10%? But right now it's less than 1%, because media makes money and clicks and fame and power by scaring the hell out of us. And that's the underlying problem. We have to shift the conversation. The conversation on climate right now, and especially in the US, but it's true in a lot of other countries, including Canada too, is the same conversation we seem to be having about everything. It's polarizing, it's intended to divide us, it's intended to install fear, and it's intended to make money and power for very few people in media, activism, and politics. But the rest of us are getting screwed by this. So here's the narrative we're seeing on climate. And it sounds a lot like the narrative we hear about everything else. Here it goes. It says the world is going to hell, and those bad people are to blame for it. And if you get angry enough and do what I tell you and vote the way I tell you and do what I say you should do, we can beat the bad guys and we're going to win. Interestingly, that never seems to go anywhere. We just get more mad and the world keeps going to hell and people get more angry and blaming others. And we are in this vicious cycle. Is this true for climate? Yes. Is it true for race relations and equity and justice? Seems like it. Is it true for everything else? Yep, yep, yep. And it's really bad in the United States these days on almost every issue you can imagine. But to get anywhere, we got to change this narrative and remind people, no, stop. The world is beautiful. It's amazing, but it does need some help to stay that way. And guess what? The solutions to our problems are abundant and they're here right now. They're all around us. And if we could work together, we can create a beautiful and better future. That's the narrative that's going to win. That's the one that will inspire us to change the world and make it a better place. So let me wrap up. Here are some last thoughts for all of us today, and then we can turn it over for a conversation. I'd love to hear from you all. Here's my ask of all of you. We need your help. We need everyone. We need the leadership of everybody. Don't wait just for the political officials, the people we elect every few years to solve the problem. How well has that worked so far? We need leadership from all of us, from community levels, from every kind of organization, schools, libraries, nonprofits, faith groups, civic groups, whatever, just every ordinary neighborhoods, ordinary families, all of us. We need to step up and shift the climate conversation and our leadership in fundamental ways. Yes, we have problems, but we've got more solutions and they're growing every day. And we can win this race between the problems getting worse and the solutions getting better if we choose to. Can we also look around for bold leadership, especially amongst people who haven't been heard from so much? Too much of the climate conversation, unfortunately, looks like people kind of like me. People who've been kind of privileged, white, male, middle class, educated, whatever. Let's look around to highlight and share the stage and put a spotlight on other leaders who haven't been heard from, who have great, incredible energy and leadership to offer the world. Can we listen to the science more and make sure that not only we listen to the science about the problem, but also on the solutions, because we're not doing that very well. Can we find science to guide us out of this darkness into a better place of getting the solutions right? And can we most of all hold on to some sense of, at least, if you not, maybe not hope, if you don't want to use that word, can you at least hold on to the possibility of a better world? Just give me that it's at least possible that we could maybe just pull it off and get this right. And there's a window of opportunity to do so. That would be fantastic. And at the end of the day, we need to collaborate. No one person, certainly no one organization, no one country, no one anything is going to get this done by themselves. We're going to have to work together across every skill set, every organization, every level, from local to global, every nation, everything to get this done. So many people come up to me and ask, what can I do to solve climate change? And I'm looking, I don't know, what can you do? Because we're going to need it. Oh, you're an artist. Wow, we're going to need you. You're a nurse. Wow, we need you. You're an electrician. Thank God. You're a lawyer. Good. You're a librarian. Excellent. We need you. We need everybody to step up and figure out how we can solve this together in ways that also make a better world along the way. A world that is more equitable, more fair, more verdant, more sustainable, more secure, more prosperous, and just better. And together we can change that world. And let me assure you, it is not yet game over on climate. Don't raise the white flag just yet. It's game on. This moment, it's it. This is go time. This is the moment we have our backs against the wall when we can be the best people we could possibly be and step up to the challenge of our generation and beyond. I really believe this is an incredible moment in time. Yes, we have great challenges, but we have great people, and an extraordinary world is within reach. It is just out there, just beyond our grasp right now. We can see it, and I believe if we work together, we can reach it too. And I look to see if we can all join together in making that possible. So with that, I'll stop here and again say thank you to all the folks who made this day possible, and see if we can, I'll turn it over to Dan for some Q&A and conversation. But thank you so much for the chance to speak with you today, and look forward to your questions and conversation. So thank you.
John, thank you so much. I mean, I've had this picture behind me for the past month, and it's a privilege to see it in real life, or at least virtually. There's some great feedback coming back. So just right off the bat, before we start digging in, thank you. It's events like these that give me hope personally, being in the space, because it pulls people together. We have to see that we're part of the whole and not individual pieces. And there's a lot of emojis flying around right now. So as we dig into this, there's definitely a lot of questions, and keep on coming in, folks. We do have the next 15 to 20 minutes to ask Dr. Foley these questions. And I think I'll just start with one I see off the bat here by Scott. Can you dig deeper into the failure of food and agricultural issues to attract finance and policy action? And what can we be doing about the second largest dimension of climate change?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's been a big failure to address the food, land use, and agricultural part of climate change. As you point out, and rightly so, the biggest emitters globally for climate change are electricity production is about a quarter, food is about a quarter, and then industry is about a quarter now. Everything else is the last quarter. So it's one of the big three players. It's very, very interesting. In the United States, we had this big investment of public dollars under the Biden administration for climate solutions. But if you think big oil has a stranglehold on national governments, wait until you meet big ag, because they're not even looking at the places where climate solutions are in agriculture. The biggest problems in agriculture around the world, anyway, they're different in Canada, the US, and Brazil, and other countries, but globally added together are deforestation, too much beef and rice and other things that emit methane, and way too much fertilizers being used out there creating nitrous oxide in our soils. That's it. Those are huge. So how do we stop deforestation? Well, most of that's driven by beef and animal feed and palm oil, especially in places like Indonesia and Brazil. Okay, 3 commodities, 2 countries, you have half the deforestation on the planet. That's incredible. Deforestation right now, by the way, emits 11% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, and it's going up again. The United States, the whole US economy, is 11% and falling. So it's equal to the entire US economy, but we don't talk about it enough. That's just deforestation. Animal agriculture is another 14% right there too. It overlaps the deforestation. That's another big area, but especially methane. We have no other choice but to have less meat overall, less dairy overall, and much less food waste. That is mathematically irreconcilable. Now, whatever, we won't get rid of all of it. I still eat some beef, a little tiny bit once in a while, but we have to dramatically downsize that and have much more plant-rich diets than we do today, especially in rich Western countries. There's no other mathematical way possible. But what we raise the rest, that's where kind of regenerative practices could do better too. We could have less beef and better beef at the same time, and less food waste. That's crucial. But none of these things are attractive to policymakers because they're kind of getting to the heart of ag subsidies, very political, very powerful interest, and culture. In the US, you talk about, changing diets. Oh my God, people will come after you with torches and pitchforks. You're going to take away my hamburger? No way, man, you can't do that. So it's something that politicians don't touch. So we're going to have to come up with not just sticks, but better carrots, literally. How do we attract people to choosing different kinds of diets, to reducing food waste, finding the economic and culture case for doing that? They're abundant, though. Already beef consumption in the US is at an all-time low from the last 50 years, especially on a per capita basis, but even overall, but it needs to fall more. How do we do that? I don't know. Well, there are a lot of good reasons, but health, animal welfare, other things could help a lot. So, there's good things there. And people still eat beef, great, but let's grow it better and do it regeneratively, so it's not so harmful to the environment. That would be good. A lot of win-wins there. So there are a lot of things we can do, but it's not attracting the same kind of public dollars for sure, because politicians are basically wimps and don't want to do this. And technologists don't quite understand the field very well. There's no gizmo that solves this problem. There's no Tesla for solving ag right now, or no app on your iPhone. But I think there are technology and public and private investment plays to stop climate change problems from agriculture. But a lot of this has to be culture and maybe activism driven. We're going to have to do this by persuading people to make different choices. This is where consumer behavior is so important. Food waste is huge. shifting diets, even a little bit. I think, at the risk of irritating some people maybe in this audience, very, very militant vegan friends of mine, I think sometimes can hurt the larger community a little bit sometimes, because trying to get people to say you have to give up all meat and dairy forever, cold turkey today, no pun intended, cold turkey, right? She use another metaphor. Right now, a lot of people, but wait, I like that stuff. So they go into denial and get into big arguments. How about less beef, less dairy? Just let's see if we can move you along the spectrum just a little bit less, a little bit less. Maybe we could be flexitarians. I hate that word, but can we do a little bit better and skip beef and dairy a little bit and still say once in a while it's better than not cutting it at all. So it's a culture and activism as well as policy and business play, but it's we have to kind of pull the right levers in the right order. I think it's going to be very, very challenging, but very important. And the big three are, again, deforestation, methane from animals, and too much fertilizer emissions is a big one. Not making fertilizer, it's the fertilizer out in the farm fields that creates a gas called nitrous oxide. And that's when we over apply fertilizers so much, especially in places like the US, China, and India. So we have a lot of, there good technology solutions could be helpful, more precision ag, as well as more like regenerative and organic practices too. But we can probably do a lot from lots of different dimensions here.
Thanks so much. And I think even from a local perspective, like I know in Kingston, I think it's this Sunday, our Memorial Center Farmers Market, that's a local market, all driven by local farmers and crafters and other makers. It's open again Sunday outside. It's been running all year. But again, that's the thing. Sometimes going to the farmers market, that is a climate action, right? And I know locally we have, go ahead, sorry.
Actually, I hate to be that guy, scientists
That's okay.
like to.
Well, you got yeah, I'm more of a talker.
It turns out local food is not really a climate solution. It's a great solution for other problems, but food miles and transporting food is a very small part of global emissions, less than 1%. And it's more about what you eat and how it was grown, not where it was grown. So local beef is still worse than importing vegetables from British Columbia. But, just be a little careful there. Local isn't automatically less carbon. It's also what you eat, but local food's great for other things. Don't get me wrong; it's better for biodiversity, probably better for local communities, income, work. Also, probably reduces the food waste in the supply chains. So I love local food, but it's not the food miles thing. Also, the big food companies are really good at shipping food on rail or boats, which emit very little carbon. Most of the carbon emitted moving food around is us driving to the store and back in an SUV. In places like the US and Canada, turns out. So local food's not, and it isn't one of our drawdown solutions because we did the math on that. So, turns out it's kind of not even a round-off error in the bigger food equation. It's more what we eat and whether it's grown with deforestation, too many animals, or too much fertilizer. But local food's great for other problems.
Well, and a lot of folks at the market are, organic and just some of the practice, I guess, what I was drawing from, and again, just a way for us to visualize how we can get more involved, I think, on a day-to-day perspective, but that's the type of thing, or even getting involved with, the local farmers union to build that community, to meet people, to understand, what people are doing and how they're doing it, I have a question here from Norman, and this is just from your experience and perspective. What is missing maybe from business models in some of the priority areas? Like, are there other models you've seen, or is this something you could speak to of how it's being executed? We have the sole proprietorship, the corporation, the charity, but are other ways to bring community together to either invest or move some actions forward?
Yeah, it's very, very trendy in climate movements to just rail against capitalism, but frankly, replacing capitalism in a market-driven economy the way we have it today is a much bigger, harder problem than solving climate change. So I kind of tend to think of how do we solve climate change within the current world order, as sucky as it may be some days to think that way, but I'm trying to be a pragmatist. Doesn't mean I like it, but I'm saying, okay, I think that we can modify the way business rules are working so it can be much more climate friendly. We can still have working markets. We can still have growth in the economy. but with far less material intensity, much less energy intensity, and almost zero out greenhouse gas emissions. And Canada is not doing this, by the way, but the US actually has been dropping its greenhouse gas emissions pretty consistently since 2007. We've already dropped our emissions by about 21% since the peak in 2007, even though the US economy has grown back a lot and our population's grown. The UK has cut its emissions by 40%, believe it or not, since the 1990s. So it is possible to decouple economic growth and greenhouse gas emissions. We just need to do it 10 times faster now. By the way, that does include trade with China and everything else. That is including all international trade. US and 40 other countries in the world are cutting their emissions while still growing economically. That's kind of interesting. So I think we need a smarter business, not just a bigger business. And there are ways to do things, none of us, unless you're ExxonMobil or somebody like that, very few companies really benefit from fossil fuels. They benefit from goods and services and the people who want them. So we can produce goods and services without burning fossil fuels, without bad agriculture. We can do lots of great things without wrecking the planet. So how do you incentivize that? Through the risk of opportunity and mitigating risk. If you can convince companies this will lower your risk of cost of materials, inflationary pressures, volatility in commodities markets by using renewables. You're no longer dependent on the Ukraine or Russia being at war or not, or on the Middle East or on fickle OPEC countries or whatever. You're making your own power now. That's fantastic. Or how do you show that it's reducing risk reputationally or future regulations? CEOs and others are very sensitive to managing risk. They don't want it much more than they are maximizing profits. Companies don't maximize profits. They minimize risk and boost confidence for shareholder value for the price of the stock. Uber has never been profitable ever yet. People made millions off of it. So profit isn't the thing. It's about risk and value proposition overall. So that's really important. The other thing is showing companies you are going to be at a competitive advantage. You have an opportunity your competitors don't have, but looking around the corner and saying, hey, climate change is real. If I get out ahead of this, I'm going to be at a big advantage over my competitors because I took it seriously first. I like to tell companies there are two kinds of companies in the future, the ones that took climate change seriously and the ones that are gone. Which one do you want to be? Pick one. You don't get both. So that's the future. And, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. We found a better way to do things. And so do you want to be an innovator and a leader, or do you want to be gone? So that's where I think you make the case for business. The other way to do it, we found, is getting the employees on board. That's why we always talk every job as a climate job. A lot of young people who work in companies are, asking themselves, why am I working for this company that doesn't believe what I believe? So internal pressure by getting kind of employee activism, shareholder activism, and others to change leadership and what they perceive as risk and opportunity is huge. So get the carrots, get the sticks, use them both. Change the risk formula, change the opportunity formula. You can change business behavior. Not fast enough, but I think we can do better. Also, there are innovations like B Corps and public benefit corporations, things like that I think are really interesting. But at the end of the day, business can be pretty brutal and short-sighted. We have to look longer term and keep at it. But if we don't convince the trillions of dollars of capital out there that are in private hands and the enormous political clout they have, we will lose. We're not going to get this just by electing enlightened leaders and hope they do the right thing. We have to get business to either join us or get out of the way. But opposing what we want, we can't win.
So with that being said, and something I'm passionate about, and I'm 40 years old now. I'm an adult. We have to adult, but there are kids, right? There's youth, and so I know firsthand. There are a lot of youth that are worried or worse about the climate future, as you mentioned. What do you think, or what have you seen? How can we give? What can leadership do to give more hope and minimize mental health issues? Like, where do you see some maybe interventions or opportunity to give youth more hope or that possibility you've mentioned, if adults like myself or my parents are worried about the same thing?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that. I'm going to give two-handed answer on this one because there's no right answer to this question. On one hand, I think a lot of empathy and understanding of people who are feeling grief, anxiety, and fear around climate change is only the right thing to do, especially as an older person, as a parent, as a leader in the community, as a teacher, as a mentor. I think, having empathy and understanding for especially younger people are like, I'm really scared about the future. Absolutely. But at the other end, that can be true. And another thing can be true too, is like, oh, come on, really? Like when, I'm older than you, when a Gen Xer or boomer hears like, I'm worried about climate change, I'm like, hold my beer. Remember the Cold War? Remember the Soviet Union? You remember like we're all going to die within 15 minutes of anybody pushing a button? Or how about people went to Vietnam? People lived in World War II and the Depression. Every generation has been in a race between the world going to hell and the world getting better. But today, the world is better than it has ever been in any material way. Yeah, climate change is pretty serious, but it's nothing like what our parents had to go through fighting fascism and the Depression, or what civil rights leaders have faced, or what they faced at the end of apartheid and things like this. And don't tell me that's impossible to stop climate change. Everything I was told as a child was impossible turned out to not only be possible, they were inevitable. Nobody thought when I was a kid that gay marriage could be legal, and now it's the law of the land. Nobody thought that America could elect an African-American president, but we did by overwhelming margins, twice. And he's still the most popular president in recent history. Nobody thought the Soviet Union could collapse, we could end the Cold War, but it did, it was inevitable. Nobody thought that apartheid could end, but it did, and it was inevitable. So when people say, oh my God, this is the worst crisis that's ever been and we can't do anything, I'm like, oh, give me a break. Stop running up the white flag before you've even tried. Get up off your butt and go do something. I think we need empathy and understanding, yes, but also coddling. And what I think is happening here is the third thing is we've developed a political business model, a media business model, and an activism business model that's powered by fear and division. We tell that narrative I said before, the world is going to shit and those people are to blame for it, and you should be scared. People are hearing that everywhere they turn. But Martin Luther King didn't go around the country or around the world saying, I have a nightmare. He said, I have a dream. There's a better world as possible. How about we work together to go achieve that? Now it's kind of naive to say that because he died for that dream. He didn't live to see it. We're still waiting for it to be fulfilled. But it's a dream worth dying for. It's a dream worth, even worse, living for. So what about climate change? Yeah, a better world is possible. Let's get off our butts and do something about it. Again, I have empathy and understanding for those moments of fear, but at the end of the day, don't be so indulgent, I would say. It's like, really? You think you're the first generations in history to face scary things? Well, let me show you some history books, folks, and let's talk about what we can do. So I'm probably being a little harsh here, but one hand, some understanding and a little bit of a kick in the ass. I think that's what I would say. We need a bit of both, and myself included. I get down pretty hard on this stuff too some days, but then I kick myself in the butt and say, wait a minute, some of my ancestors died so I could be here today. A lot of my ancestors, went through like stuff I can't even imagine and gave up a lot so that their children could live a better world. The least I could do is show up to work in the morning and kind of try to help. So maybe we could do that too. We have an obligation to every generation that lived before us who did so much so we could be here and live the lives we have today. The least we could do is try for the future and not give up without a fight. So that would be my argument, with a big dose of empathy too, because it is hard, but it's also amazing.
I'd like to ask one more question and then just wrap up. And I'd like
to. Sorry.
No problem at all.
Yes, the question I'm obviously passionate about.
No. And this is very. So there's some great questions. And so I'm going to first apologize to everyone out there. Well, thank you. But we won't be able to answer them all tonight, but there will be follow-up. Project Drawdown has everything there. There's great teams, great solutions. I just saw you guys were integrating into LinkedIn Learning, which I thought was just another great way to get it out. Yep. But this is where does colonization fit into this equation in the way of thoughts on mind or spirit shift and how we see, view, and value the earth that sustains us. So I know the science side and the belief that what project is based in, but the side that I'm feeling more often that the gap is this piece, my spirit. Like that's what I feel, right? Like that's what I don't have the answer to, and that's what I'm trying to learn through listening and engaging with others. So I think it would be fitting. Thanking the local and global Indigenous leadership to end with just some of your perspective of what you get to see from the Drawdown lens.
Well, That's such a wonderful question. And I'll say right now, I'm utterly unqualified to answer it. I'm a white guy from Minnesota, for crying out loud, middle-aged white guy with too much education and privilege to answer that question as well as many other people could from a different perspective. But I'll just say this. At the end of the day, no matter your frame of reference, we use a science frame. That's just one way of knowing the world, as an empirical kind of scientific lens. It does serve us well, but it's not enough. A lens that is asking deeper, more spiritual questions about what the meaning of our lives and our role in the universe, and connecting to something bigger than who we are at the surface, is so fundamental to whatever we do. It has to be motivated with heart, not just with our heads. So I think it's really important to open our minds and our hearts to different perspectives, those who might be a little older and wiser than us in the West, including indigenous knowledge, but also other forms of knowledge throughout history that have taught us that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves, something much older than ourselves. I think a lot about that chain of humanity. When there's something like a human being has walked this planet for 6 million years, and every generation has fought and died and suffered and sacrificed so the next generation could live a better life. If that's, to me, that's the unspoken commandment, that's the unspoken covenant of humanity, that we should live lives that really ensure that the next generation lives a better life than we ourselves had. I think that's some of the lessons we see from indigenous communities who had longer foresight and how they handled their relationship to nature and each other, but also thoughtful leaders from every corner of the world. How do we live lives that address the people who are not even here today? How do we become good ancestors? How do we live equitably today and equitably for all the people who have never even been born? Not yet. That demands a different spiritual, ethical, and lens than we currently have, I think, in too many of our decisions. So for me, I guess I would leave with this thought that, we must be guided by our hearts and our heads, that we can really find the humanity to be the best people we can be. And I think that demands an intergenerational compact. And that's something that we, in too many of the Western and European traditions, are not always so good at. And we have every right, but also responsibility to learn from others who see the world maybe differently and maybe more wisely than we have sometimes. At the same time, an empirical scientific lens is also helpful too. I think there's more ways of knowing the world than just one, and we become better people by embracing them all.
Thank you, John. And thank you everyone for joining tonight. As you said there, it reminds me of my favorite poet, Shane Koizan, that says, and I don't have it exact, but it's the seed doesn't see it. The seed grows without knowing the plant, what it's going to become. It doesn't see it, but it grows, right? And it's that piece there that kind of resonated with what you just said, for myself anyway. So the next steps, I think that's where I can end, if that's okay. And I appreciate everyone. We're just a couple minutes over. And John, thanks again for everything that you guys have done. Please Google and go to, it's projectdrawdown.org, John?
Drawdown.org,
Okay.
Just the word drawdown.org. If you type projectdrawdown.org, it'll probably redirect you to the right place too. But yeah, drawdown.org is where you can find us, and you can follow us at Project Drawdown on social media, for example, Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all the rest. So thank you all for the time today and the attention and the feedback. It's been delightful to spend some time with you. And thank you so much for all your time and having me be able to visit you in Ontario, at least in a virtual way. So thank you so much.
Exactly. And this is just to end off. I remember when I was a boy, this is from Fred Rogers, and I think this is important for our community at this point, at least what I see. I talk about this stuff all the time and have been a while, and connecting to all different types of people. And I feel very privileged to know a lot of people probably watching this call, and what you're doing for this, and what groups that you're connected to are doing, and the passion that we have together. Fred Rogers said, when I was a boy, I would see scary things in the news. My mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You always find people are helping. There's activists like 350 Kingston locally, or the NFU, the National Farmers Union. The city of Kingston has climate champs at a local level, and integrating deep retrofit programs like Better Homes Kingston. I used it myself, my family, and we have an 8.9 kilowatt system on, and a heat pump now, and a heat pump hot water tank that significantly reduced our greenhouse gases. we saved up for years to do it, but these grants and the processes and people working on it, they make it easier. They help, right? Quantum Solar got my solar up. It's all local. Sustainable Kingston can help with audits, and there's Little Forest Kingston looking at regenerating, and Loving Spoonful helping with community gardens. Innovative building techniques through private business I know that attend, but we also have libraries that are commons for us and we have to protect with knowledge. So with that being said, thank you. There will be a follow-up email. This was voluntarily put on, so it might take a couple of days, but we'll put a follow-up email with links of local organizations as well as the talk. Please spread the word, please keep hope. And thank you for participating tonight. Thanks again, John, Project Drawdown, and everyone else. Have a fantastic night.